Former President Donald Trump is throwing his support behind a challenge to Georgia's top elections official. Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger has been a recent target of Mr. Trump's attacks. It started after he refused to reverse President Biden's win in the state last November. Secretary Raffensperger also staunchly defended Georgia's election integrity over unfounded claims of voter fraud by the former president. Now, GOP Congressman Jody Hice is running with Trump's backing to unseat Raffensperger next November. He objected to the Electoral College vote count after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Political reporter Greg Bluestein broke the news of Hice's candidacy for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And Greg joins us now. Greg, thank you so much for being with us. So help us understand better why Mr. Raffensperger is such a target for Trump-supporting Republicans and the impact that the Congressman Hice's decision to run. Because a lot of folks have been watching these GOP dynamics in Georgia and sort of waiting for things to kind of come to a head.
Yeah, well, this is at least one of the areas where it will come to a head. Former President Trump pinned the blame for his election defeat squarely on Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and other state Republican officials who did not aggressively support or push back on his false claims of widespread voting fraud. And that's exactly what Secretary of State Raffensperger did. He denied Trump's efforts to, on that famous phone call, to find enough votes to overturn the election. And he pushed back every chance he got at any sort of allegation that Georgia didn't hold a free and fair election. And this was an election that was upheld by 3 different vote tallies and every single lawsuit claiming voter fraud was tossed out by courts at every level. So Trump is basically right now mounting somewhat of a revenge tour against Georgia Republicans who he deems as insufficiently supportive of his claims. And it starts with Brad Raffensperger because Congressman Hice has been an avowed Trump supporter. He backed the Texas lawsuit seeking to invalidate Georgia's election results. And he was the one who introduced the challenge in Congress of Georgia's Electoral College results on January 6th, shortly after the insurrection.
Well, Republicans had won every statewide runoff since 1992 until Democratic Senators Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff prevailed in January. Greg, what are the proposed election changes from state lawmakers, and what's the justification for them?
Yeah, I mean, they range. Some are more minor that both parties can agree on in terms of tallying ballots earlier so that there's not a drawn out, basically week-long process like we had in November. Others would shorten that time frame so that there won't be a 9-week runoff anymore. It would be closer to 4 weeks like other states have. And then there's the more controversial proposals moving through the State House. Among them, severely limit who could vote by mail, restrict the use of ballot boxes, of drop boxes, and cut down on weekend voting. Those are the provisions that are still alive in various pieces of legislation. Even though leaders say they won't cross, some of those will not cross the ultimate finish line and make it to Governor Brian Kemp's desk, advocates still say, hey, look, it's not over till it's over. And in Georgia, the legislative session, the final gavel will not bang until next week.
Well, Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp ran for office while serving as the Secretary of State and oversaw the purge of over 300,000 names from voter rolls. Now, the Republican Secretary of State says the past election was one of the most secure. No legal challenge arguing otherwise has actually succeeded. So if fraud does not seem to be a widespread problem, why focus on it, Greg? And is there a downside for Republicans pushing further voting restrictions?
I'll start with the second question first. The downside is what happened in January, where a lot of Republicans who had heard those false claims of a rigged election and systemic voting fraud believed them and stayed home. We'll never know how many exactly were swayed by that argument, but we do know, especially in very conservative parts of Georgia, in northwest Georgia and parts of rural South Georgia, there was significant numbers of Georgia Republican voters who Republican Senators David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler were relying upon, who stayed home. When it comes to moving forward, as Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger said, he wants some more minor changes. He wants, for instance, ID requirements at the ballot for mail-in ballots that Democrats still oppose, but a majority of Georgia voters, at least by an AJC poll, said that they support. So there's efforts he wants to sort of, in his words, to secure the ballot, but he has not gone nearly as far as other Republicans who have parroted former President Trump's false claims of election fraud, who say that much more stringent requirements need to be put in place in order to restore integrity.
Yeah, as I said, Greg, so much attention being focused on your state with the political dynamics there, and particularly on the Republican side. But we know from just having covered the election, the critical place that Georgia occupies because of the changing demographics that we have been seeing. And now we're seeing these moves on the part of legislators there. So much to talk about. I'm afraid we're out of time. But Greg Bluestein in Atlanta, thank you so much, as always, for helping us sort through it all.
Thank you.